So on this day in history, now today obviously being March 18th, and you figure March 18th, what is that? It's not a significant date. But if you're a wrestling fan, March 18th means a lot to you, and especially if you were a fan of this company. On this date, March 18th, 2001, 14 years ago today, World Championship Wrestling held their final pay-per-view event. WCW Greed emanated from the Jacksonville Coliseum in Jacksonville, Florida. On this date, March 18, 2001. Scott Steiner defeated Diamond Dallas Page in the main event to retain the WCW World Heavyweight Championship. And that was it. That was the last pay-per-view that WCW ever did. And, yeah, the obvious whole end of an era came 8 days later when Nitro was the final Nitro and it all went off the air. And we're going to have these nostalgic end-of-era moments because obviously today we celebrate, or we look back on, we reflect on the final WCW pay-per-view. And a couple of days from now, we're going to have the anniversary of the final WCW Thunder. And wrestling on TBS, you know, I think the Thunder, the final Thunder was more significant because it was the final wrestling broadcast ever on TBS. And while Nitro was on TNT and that was the flagship, wrestling always had a home forever on TBS. TNT was kind of the new hip kid and Nitro had that. But TBS was Georgia Championship Wrestling. TBS was WCW Saturday Night. That was everything. That was everything. TBS was wrestling. Wrestling was TBS. So I think the final Thunder was more significant because that was the final TBS, the final wrestling program on TBS. Now, obviously, the final Nitro was the final wrestling program on a Turner Network and also the final WCW show. That was the whole kabang. But I think the last Thunder is overlooked because it was the final show on TBS. Trivia. What was the main event? The final segment of the last Thunder. I'll give you a hint. Involved Dustin Rhodes. Comment on the comment section on YouTube. But yeah, I think WCW airing their final Thunder on TBS was hugely significant. And this was significant too, obviously, this day, because they started with Starrcade in '83, and to me, I always thought that WCW went above and beyond and really gave us something on the pay-per-views that we didn't see on Nitro. And that's the next video that's going to come up, is how I feel that the pay-per-views in pro wrestling don't mean anything anymore. And how it kind of died out in early 2000. But WCW always gave us matches and stuff on pay-per-views that you never saw on Nitro. You never saw on Thunder. And that's what made WCW pay-per-view so special. And yeah, maybe Tony Schiavone exaggerated a little bit by everything Schiavone said was the greatest moment in the history of pro wrestling. But I'm sorry, Schiavone made WCW pay-per-views feel like they were the shit. And a lot of the time they were. So this is very significant, and it's a sad day. It's going to get even sadder in the next week where we mourn and we remember the final week of World Championship Wrestling. And honestly, there has never been a company close to taking out the WWE since WCW. TNA has got very minutely close, but they don't even compare to what WCW did. Ring of Honor hasn't even made a dent in them. And honestly, what else is there? WCW had them on the ropes. WWF woke up. They adjusted. WCW never adjusted to the WWF's adjustments. And really, if you want to think about it, for 14 years, we really have only had one big major pro wrestling company. I'm sorry, I don't think TNA has ever made a dent. They've had a nice little following. But they have never compared. They have never even sniffed a rating that WCW got in its dying days. "14 years ago, honestly, I want to say it was the year wrestling died. Back after this on the Story Network.